So one of the main points for the discussion today would be going over Nuanced Company's Creator predictions that Noah actually did in 2024. He wrote a thread on Twitter initially, kind of jolting down what he predicted would be, kind of playing out over 2025 on all things content creators and AI. And yeah, I just wanted to kind of pick out a few of his best predictions or more juicy predictions and kind of go over them and see how they played out, or if they're currently playing out at the moment, and if they have legs to keep going. So let's get right into it.
The Nuanced Company Creator Crypto Skewed Predictions and Thoughts for 2025. This was written, I believe, in December of last year, just kind of going over more or less predictions that I had been thinking about. I think it was like really late at night. I just decided to kind of just write out on a tweet first and then expanded it into a larger thought piece that later was transitioned over to LinkedIn and then like a blog post. Figure this would probably be a great start to kind of maybe unpack some of these predictions that have already started to, I guess, come alive or hit, and then kind of seeing where things have kind of just ended up being. The first one, I think the idea here was generative AI will greatly enhance a creator's arsenal to affect distro, content creation, admin in the vein of legal and finance advice, branding with an increase in use by the second half of the year. My thoughts just more so based on the idea that we had a lot of momentum from a lot of different types of AI companies and platforms that were creating different products, different tools. And I think creators in general, as you and I both know, they're usually the first adopters to leveraging a specific piece of technology, especially if it helps them create content and to just focus on what they do best, right? Creating. And I think as of now, we've probably seen a lot of different types of posts kind of come out, whether it is using specific brands or companies' tools, whether it's to put out like a teaser of an image, actually creating these AI specific video channels, faceless channels, I think are also another big area, but I'd like to think this one still holds. And it's probably one of the bigger ones that I think people are paying more attention to.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest advantages for content creators has always been their ability to obviously have complete creative control of what they put out. One of the limitations content creators have always was obviously being primarily a one-man crew. So I think one of the biggest leverages that AI can give a creator is the ability for them to amplify kind of like their leverage to produce. So, it's a pretty spot on, I would say, prediction, because I think we're only going to see this become more and more prevalent, right? Especially as we know, there's a lot of, current companies with tooling and things to help creators.
It's only going to grow, so, I feel. Yeah. I think the sophistication of teams and companies that are building these tools, I think to either make it for product market, if they are focused on creators, if they're smart and they actually recruit creators to either come internally or to work with them on a very close basis, you probably see that explode. I think even more. I think a lot of brands even today, even outside of the AI or tech space, I think they all recognize the power of creators and what they contribute. So certainly an area that I think will continue to have a lot of development, which I'm pretty excited to see, because I feel like creators are always searching for new companies or new tools just to help them with minimizing friction.
Yeah, one of the good things as well is like a lot of, like you said, like you mentioned in your blog, which was admins. Obviously like a huge pain point for creators, right? Content creators obviously do not want to be bothered, take too much time on admin, doing like the accounting stuff, the legal stuff. Having the ability to leverage AI to figure those things out and making sure that you're not like screwed over a contract because you don't have time to read it and you just kind of want to sign it and get on with the brand deal is massive.
I'm also kind of curious though with this one too, because I actually have seen it in practice, and maybe this is touching more so on like the compliance side of things, when creators are using specific tools or resources. Some people that use things like ChatGPT as their lawyer, right? And say that, oh, I'm going to talk to my lawyer, but what ends up happening behind the scenes is, they're writing a prompt or they're writing a specific scenario, and then it spits out whatever it spits out. And then it's a bit shaky ground, right? Because I'd like to think also in some of the responses that I've gotten for some folks that I've spoken to, you can tell it is GPT generated. And I think that therein is a problem because one,
right,
it's probably not admissible in any court, but at the same time, the unethical side of things where you're kind of taking this specifically within like the legal side of things, right? A lawyer who has probably spent a lot of time formalizing their reputation and their livelihood to have an actual JD to practice law, and kind of seeing maybe a creator or someone else using GPT as their quote unquote lawyer. I'd like to think that's, it's dangerous, right?
I think from what I know, it definitely happens. One thing that I must, of course, having ChatGPT just a legal document for you and to find like, let's say like a shady or like a weird looking clause essentially locks you out from owning your own content or something that you don't intend to sell to like a sponsor or brand. That's one thing, right? Because it can definitely point that out very easily without you having to just like read over legalese. But yeah, drafting up like an MSA or like any sort of, agreement with ChatGPT can definitely be, without having like an actual like lawyer on your side can be a little bit tricky. One thing I do know is like a lot of people do put the effort to draft some documents. They send it off and just say like, hey, does this look, like airtight or bottomed up? And, 8 times out of 10, the legal counsel will say like, yeah, that looks just fine. So you'll basically end up saving yourself some money, just for them to go over it. But at least they won't have to draw it up. It does end up making your life a little bit without having to fully have a lawyer. I think AI is at that point where it can take you like 80% of the way there.
So I suppose even for viewers or other folks that may be watching this, right, I think it's always the recommendation that you don't use it as your primary source, but more as a secondary source after you've gone through the proper channels to get the information that you need. And of course, I think this is our own disclaimer that it's usually the recommendation we make to creators or clients of ours. I think just looking at this one and maybe to wrap this one up, I think originally in my mind, when I had listed out sort of the 3 main buckets of distribution, content creation, and admin, as far as like even ranking kind of the actual use, I think creators is time. Content creation, like I still feel like is not there yet, primarily to be the primary thing that generative AI is going to be used for. I think people use it mostly for inspiration and kind of seeing what's possible, but it's different, I think, for the type of creator that you are. I think if you're a faceless channel, 100% faceless, specific to AI content certainly is, I would say content creation is 100% of your focus and time. I think for someone that is already a creator, whether they are in the gaming vertical, the crypto vertical, I still think distribution and the administrative side are certainly your best friends in terms of using Gen AI, right? For the next one, 3, which saw during the second half of 2024, more copycats of category leaders, content metas, and optimizations, expecting an uptick of people diving into different categories of streaming, leaning into lifestyle formats, content houses, and blending verticals that have natural crossover, which includes things like gambling, gaming, interviews. There'll be a ton of fresh content and creators, but once that settles, the power law will remain in effect, thereby creating a natural pecking order. I'd like to think this was probably more settled from the fact that I think despite any industry, power laws exist for a reason. I think more so in the creator space. To have a very cursory explanation of power laws, it's a distribution of a graph that tells you, there's a certain percentage of individuals that I think, at least in the creator context, command most of the economics, right? So the top 1% usually is the one that are getting most of the brand deals, the viewership, the engagement, everything that we know about content creation and creators mostly come through the lens of those users, or rather those power users. And the power law certainly reinforces itself no matter what industry you're kind of creating in. But I just felt a lot of it was based off of the momentum and conversations of where people were paying attention or paying more attention to, and then also the types of content that they were creating in crypto. So this was written in December, and I remember seeing a larger wave of meme coins and trading being the dominant, I guess, for lack of a better term, content that was being put out on X. and you started to see a lot more people maybe dipping their toes into live streaming or doing short form videos or skits. I think this also coincided with a poker stream that I had coordinated too around that time, where people were getting more interested in things like poker, card games, and then online casinos. So I'd like to think this one still is, I would say, a prediction that holds true, given the fact that today, I mean, we're now in June of 2025. You're seeing a lot more content houses kind of popping up. You're starting to see people wanting something more than just staring at a chart and making, I don't know, their predictions or seeing a daily runner. I don't think we're kind of in that period right now where we are seeing a whole lot of tokens kind of coming to fruition, but streaming certainly is and will always be, I think, a large part of, I think, any content creator's stack, just even from pump funds investments into their live streaming. And I'd like to think a lot of these individuals are kind of watching and observing other large creators having success in a variety of these different lanes, more or less inspires them to kind of either repeat those formats or to try to find their own voice or their own platform to kind of copy it.
Yeah, let me add some color here. I would say this prediction is playing itself out right now. Like you said, with metas and things like content houses, I think we're at the peak of the iceberg on those. Of course, we do know of a few ones brewing behind the scenes, but I think this year especially, we've already seen like a number of them go live, and I think there'll be a few more, especially since there are so many copycats. One thing that rings true in the space, and particularly crypto, and I think as AI develops a little bit, it's kind of like the hunger for the space to like follow working. And I think that's where we're seeing a lot of these metas developing and kind of seeing the wave of copycats, but then also interesting how that is also a paradox on itself, which is once everyone start doing the same thing that worked for market leader or, you know, the first person to do it, it ends up not working for long. I think when it comes to that power law, the 1% of the top or content creators, it is very important for the people to try and aim for the top, to be original and just do things, but do things that no one else has done. Because if you're just following what the upper echelon are doing, you're always going to be that one step behind. People are not really going to think about you when they think, when cool brands are thinking about, what creators should we work with? Should we work with the creators that are, that started this trend, or should we work with the creators that went after them and copied them, right? It's an easy answer.
I think, I would say this probably will continue on for a bit. I think a lot of different creators are letting their own formats kind of survive, but also form. We're only halfway into the year. I think closer to the end, we'll probably see a lot of those mature a bit more. And I'm expecting at least to see more of these kind of pop out in the future. It certainly isn't going anywhere. I'd like to think crypto is just another vertical. There's going to be a set number of people that have the star power, have the creative, truly stand out from others. And I think a lot of that just comes from my experience going through the timeline and seeing just really boring content, or maybe even boring people. I think you and I both know this from having worked with a lot of different types of creators, and maybe going back to what you were talking about, that natural hunger, right? I think people at the end of the day, they want to watch cool stuff. They want to watch things that are relatable. But if everyone's kind of doing the same thing and there's no variety, it gets stale pretty quick. So I'd like to think, at least for crypto, that's more or less stayed true for the past, I would say, 2 years to 3 years now, where everyone feels like they can make a TA analysis on a coin or a meme coin or whatever it is, right? But I've found the most compelling people in this space just being the ones that continue to experiment. They break things. They do things without regard of whatever else people are talking about their content, and they have their own North Star and they have their own vision of the types of content that they want to produce. So I'm hoping that keeps up, but I'm also, just by proxy of being at a creator management firm, know that a lot of creators and talent in this space are already well on that journey. And I won't spend all the time just going through all these or reading it verbatim, but I think the general gist here was looking at, again, from that specific time period, I think the expectation was, given a lot of the things about the upcoming year, with new president, a bull market, which I think happened, is just naturally. We were expecting, I think, more creators and celebrities to come back in. I think there was a period of time where we did see all these interested third parties come in, try to make their mark however they were trying to do it. And then for a while, it was just dry and they all disappeared. So closer to the beginning of this year, I would say folks that were looking to kind of come back in, they were all launching coins, right? I think that was probably the biggest issue that we had seen based off of even the president launching his own coin, in addition to, some other major news that happened in CT with follow-up coins like Melania, and then of course Argentina, and then all these world leaders also kind of following off the tail end of that. But I think how I've kind of thought about other creators who had vibrant platforms and built out platforms kind of coming back in, I don't necessarily think that's been too true yet. I still think there's a lot of hesitancy, although I think specific to entertainers or musicians or athletes, I think that's kind of been like a different bucket of individuals that wanted to come into this space. But I think overwhelmingly other creators that have a digital platform and are digital native, I wouldn't say there's been too many that have kind of ventured back in yet.
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to this prediction, I think probably like a unique opinion, which is I actually put celebs or athletes in a content creator bucket, because what is a content creator is someone that creates content, right? So like celebs either like do music, they dance, do film, or even if you're an athlete, right, you also make content by way of your sport, right? That's all content that people consume. They all have huge followings. They're influencers in and of its own right. They do brand deals, right? So I see them as content creators. We definitely saw this play out this cycle, but in the completely wrong way, by way of meme coins, right? So like you mentioned, I actually think that was one of the biggest mishaps of this cycle, which is whoever established this, oh yeah, let's get this celeb and let's launch a token on Pump Fun. I just think that was like probably one of the worst things that could have happened in this cycle. Back in 2021, last cycle, I remember it was a bit more wholesome, right? Celebrities were coming in, they were like, oh, I want to either do my own NFT collection or maybe like launch alongside of, someone else, someone that like an artist or something like this, or they would actually support like a really cool project, like whether it be like a Bored Ape, a Azuki. We all saw the A-listers wearing those Bored Apes in 2021, right? So I think this time around, it definitely was a lot more, I would say, nefarious, right? Like with shadowy figures like Sahil, he recently did an interview with Covizilla where he kind of like, I mean, they were even showing rates, right? Like the rates for Justin Bieber, Drake, Paris Hilton, whoever you want to name, right? But it's definitely a little bit on the, I don't know, I would say it's past unethical. I would say maybe even illegal what they were doing. But until the law wants to do something to them, I guess they can get away with it. But yeah, so I think we definitely saw this one play out. Hopefully we can get better, let's say, faces for the space to kind of get to these celebrities sooner next time they want to do stuff in the space, and maybe have a little bit better advice or advisory consulting when entering the space, because the way that it panned out was, let's be honest, it was just terrible, right?
Yeah, I think so. To kind of focus on maybe the latter part of this prediction, in terms of finding folks that are trying to gravitate towards marquee and established creators and using this as a good timing, and it's more or less easier for them to do that because they already have established brands. I think there are people outside the space that do have a genuine interest in doing things the right way, which makes me hopeful, at least for people that want to connect and build with the right creators in crypto. I think we're kind of already seeing that with a couple of other folks that started out very humbly, but also just doing a lot of the research themselves to understand and to surround themselves with the right people before doing something, right? And there's certainly a lot of people, at least at the back of my mind, that come up that wanted to do that and that have done that. So I wouldn't say this specific prediction is completely out there or just out of the mix. I think there's still a lot of time, despite however, the Fed situation plays out or changes. I think it's always a market where if you do understand the opportunity, you can find the right way to actually do things in an ethical way, but also one that is born from community buy-in. And I think that's probably the most important thing, because at the end of the day, you don't want to be extractive as much as the industry in itself portrays itself to be, or maybe the outside looking in, people feel that way about this space. There genuinely are great builders, there are great projects, and there are great creators that other celebrities or entertainers can align themselves with. I think there's just so much opportunity, but also education that needs to happen. And I'm sure finding the right dynamics will just help that mature. Yes, number 8. So this one more or less is encapsulating the salience of crypto creator brands, products, and supergroups. I think you and I both understand the end road of where a talent's brand or a creator's brand is headed. And that's after all the revenue lines are kind of a bit more mature and it's set up. Their presence is more so on autopilot. They have a specific programming schedule in mind and in action. I think the end state of a lot of creators is really just, what else can I build? And I think a lot of that is, it's not to say that they're bored. I think you don't want to give the advice to creators that they'll be creating content for the rest of their lives. And I think a viable path for a lot of these individuals is to have something that they own or something that they can build. And this has been, I think, a consistent thing for a lot of different marquee creators in the Web2 space. A lot of them either create their own agencies, creative studios, merch businesses, CPG companies. And I think especially in crypto, we're starting to see maybe the start of a lot of those things come to fruition. I know there are platforms, people starting their own predictive marketplaces, their own trading tools or prop firms, down to even mutuals kind of coming together to build their own investment groups, right? So I'd like to think, based off of the relevance of specific folks on CT, as long as they find aligning interests and they get to a certain point where their influence is starting to bleed into other industries, I think we'll see a lot more of this. And I think the current individuals that have kind of gotten to this stage already, they didn't necessarily have to build out a lot of the other parts of their brand or business to get there. I think it more just aligns with the general ethos of crypto and building things, right? Things like eGirl Capital, a bunch of friends just got together and felt like, oh, I want to invest in this specific project with my friend. And then for the Haven and other trading groups, I think there's just common alignment with trading strategies, the way that they're actually building content. And I think even for predictive marketing platforms like Myriad, I think for Farouk being a business leader himself, kind of creating Rug Radio, multiple properties, the acquisition with Decrypt, I think naturally you kind of focus on what activities are, I think, happening in the space and kind of reading that and finding ways to either update their brand, build on their portfolio, but also just use their influence to build things that they're interested in. So certainly, I think this specific prediction, I almost don't want to call it a prediction because a lot of the way that it's even worded is basically the recommendation that we have for any client or creator that we take on in terms of helping provide the resources and utility to get them to that end state of this is what's possible with your career.
Yeah, so I actually really like this, almost to the point where I feel like, especially for the content creators in this space, at the intersection of crypto, AI, it's a prime time to be building, especially where we come from. Our backgrounds in digital media, gaming, esports. When could you, back in the day, when could you go and speak to the founder of a social media? Even esports team, right? Those people became pretty exclusive pretty fast, right? You could just go and reach out to like the, you know, like the founder of TSM and talk to Reg. You could not do that. Now, you know, if you're fairly just someone that works in the space, fairly active, if you've been here, you know, a couple of years, you can probably talk to a majority of the founders in the space, which is, I mean, this is unheard of, right? Like you can go to a Discord and have a conversation with like a crypto OG or like Kobe or something. So it is kind of mind blowing the level of access that, you know, someone with good intentions and, you know, putting some effort into the space can have, especially content creators. And then I think maybe I can throw in a prediction in here, which is I think the future of a lot of creators, some of the creators are thinking forward and thinking like, what am I going to do in the future? Am I going to do content forever? The answer is obviously no. They'll have opportunities to, you know, if they are able to achieve like that brands, they'll have plenty of opportunity to take on like venture studio type deals, projects where they will be able to align services or products that they're really passionate about and kind of, you know, become the, you know, take ownership of them, drive them, become the face of them, you know, have real ownership over them. And you know, have that backing behind them with the other people with subject matter expertise and the other domains, but they'll be able to like bring those brands forward. Just literally how every other traditional content creator has done it in the space. Where I'm talking about like Mr. Beast with his chocolate business, or Emma Chamberlain with her coffee business, Sidemen with everything that they're doing, right? It will just be the same thing. And the upside in this space is we're talking about crypto and AI here, right? So I feel like a lot of these creators, even if they don't even become as big as some of these traditional creators, which are, let's be honest, like they're almost like A-lister status out there in the world with their level of influence. You don't even need to be that big in order to build some pretty insane stuff in the space. So
yeah, and I think more recently we're seeing, I think, a greater interest for folks wanting to do that. I think one of the names that actually comes to mind is Choose Rich Nick and his platform that he's building. I know like some people, I think on the timeline today, were kind of giving him flack for charging $5 for, you know, the subscription. But it's like, I think a lot of people in crypto, their concept of work and dedication and development of a platform, it almost is very surprising to me that you would have that kind of reaction, thinking that this individual is trying to be extractive by charging a piece. Well, that's kind of the natural thing that you actually do for products or SaaS tools, not to be profitable, right? But it's to effectively understand the time commitments and a lot of the resources that you're kind of putting up front for from your own team and yourself to make that sustainable. It's specifically on the economics, like it's not that big of a burden for the user to either partake in that, or for the founder or the actual project builder to want to enforce that. So yeah, I would say there's probably maybe closer to the end of the year, I'm anticipating actually to see more people kind of take their traditional skills, whether it is crypto native or having built other companies or projects, kind of appearing a bit more. I'm actually excited to see where people are going to be spending their time to convey a lot of the interests that they've always kind of held, and bring their audience along for that journey.
Oh, 100%. I almost have like no comment on that particular thing with the Choose Rich Nick and his product, which is, I think, is ridiculous. Honestly, I just think that particular person who made those comments, I think that was just rage bait, because there's no way they were serious. Like, we're talking about a big pain point in the space, particularly on the crypto side of things, is that like for years now, these companies have done everything except talk about and focus on revenue. And now you have some builders trying to like, you know, start making revenue. And then you have, quite honestly, like these pretty like stupid takes, if I'm being candid, right? But so I would just ignore that. It's almost like non-issue. One thing I did like to mention was, imagine some of like the big products that we've seen already this cycle win. So for example, imagine if a content creator was the person behind Pun Fun. Would Pun Fun had become bigger? Probably, because they would have been making content alongside it, documenting the journey, and also, you know, pushing it across more socials. It could have probably had more reach. Imagine if Polymarket had a co-founder that was a content creator, you know, on YouTube. How much more could they have gotten on their way to the top? I know, you know, these are companies that have won already, but, you know, how much more powerful and interesting would they be if they actually had a face to them, right? I would personally love to watch a behind the scenes on what it took to build like a poly market or even a pump fund, right? With Alon, right? I know Alon is on docs, but yeah, any content where, you know, a founder or builder is kind of like documenting their process, I think is deeply, the demand for it is deep for it in the space, right? Because a lot of people want to see that type of content. And also, even if you're not a content creator and you start doing that, you're essentially becoming a content creator in and of itself. So it's like a double-edged sword in a good way.
I get a lot and have seen a lot of discussion is AI going to replace creators? Much like, are they going to replace any job? I think any industry that can be automated, it eventually will be. I don't think there's any huge motivation or large blocker that's going to stop that. It's inevitable, I guess, is what I'm trying to say, right? But I think in terms of standard like content creator archetypes, yes, I feel like a lot of this is headed towards a path where we're not going to see an entirely different landscape. I think it's just going to be an added vertical, right? Much like how esports and gaming and streaming suddenly became the it spot to be a content creator, and everyone is now aspiring to be, you know, the next Aiden Ross or Speed. I think so too. It could happen with being an AI specific creator, right? I always feel the creator space is just always open to experimentation. So it really is down to who says it couldn't, right? I think there's always a distinct possibility that it can happen.
Yeah, to the question of is AI replacing the standard content creator archetype? First, you have to unpack a few things. Is, for example, like what is a standard content creator and what do you mean by, you know, what is the definition of the archetype? So like you said, it's almost like it's going to be a whole new category. So I agree with that take. But the one thing that I want to touch on is a lot of people are saying, and I've seen this multiple times now, especially over the last year or two, obviously it's particularly about, especially around the time where not only ChatGPT came out, but whenever some of the video generative models came out, where people are like, wow, like I can't even tell the difference between real or fake. This is definitely going to replace content creators. You guys are done. I think honestly, that is also one of those takes where it's just very inflammatory, because if AI is able to completely one for one or basically categorically replace content creators, my suspicion on this is that like they will basically be able to replace any job there is, because creating content is one of those things where it's not easy. It's on the harder side of things. The job of a content creator is multifaceted and they wear a lot of hats, right? Whether it's like on-camera talent, producer, writer, you know, researcher. So they do content creator, you know, when they do it right, they do so many jobs at once, every day, you know, in concurrency. So, you know, if you're going to replace creators with AI, it will definitely replace most other jobs in the world. So I don't think that that's like something that people should be like worried about. And that reality, then I guess, yeah, if everyone's getting replaced, then I guess it doesn't even matter. So let me move on from that. And the other reality, which I think is a much more realistic one and also optimistic one, because I think, you know, AI taking over is just like a doomsday scenario. I think realistically and optimistically, content creators are going to be able to thrive even more with AI, right? You could argue the more that the tech continues to improve, the less limitations that they will have, right? If a content creator back in the day, if they wanted to produce a studio level film, they couldn't never do that, right? Because they would need like backing from like, let's say Hollywood or some investment studio or like a VC that would fund the film for them. And those things, you know, they can be very expensive, right? From hiring a whole crew, equipment, you know, those cameras go for like hundreds of thousands of dollars. So now a creator can still, you know, now he can have like almost like no budget and be able to produce studio level film just with like AI or like prompting, right? They could even produce like a pilot episode that they could pitch to Netflix or something like that, right? So if you impress them, the sky's the limit. And I think that would have been much harder to do back in the day. Like basically you can just do things now, guys, you know, like we should be celebrating this.
I would say that's true, right? And I think I'll maintain the position that AI, for its advancements, its improvements, it's always going to be an additive thing for a creator. And I think when you actually look at, I guess, if we had to really put down a definition for quote unquote standard content creator archetype, I mean, it's an evolutionary process, right? I think when you look at some of the early creators that created on Vine, none of them really were creating large or rather long formats or podcasts, right? I mean, one of the most famous Viners he has his own podcast now, right? So too, I think for the general trend for a lot of these creators and influencers, I'd say back in early 2010s, the vast majority of the really popular ones were makeup artists, right? Or makeup creators and beauty creators. And I think you kind of saw these different verticals exploring different platforms, different tools, and the ones that kind of iterated over time became a lot more successful. And I think it's just a natural pathway for people to explore different pieces of technology that will help either amplify a lot of what they're doing or help scale a lot of their pain points. So even for the rise of a lot of these streamers, I mean, streaming, for what it's worth, back in like 2012, 2013, wasn't considered like the primary, I guess, creator stack. It was mostly all through YouTube or maybe Facebook video or Snapchat. I think metas tend to evolve over time, and I think we saw a greater focus of a lot of people focusing their attention and time on live streams. And that became, I think, a huge place where people were discovering content. And I think a lot of people also forget, like, YouTube is a search engine, right? And as much as you do have a lot of these YouTube creators that were creating a lot of these content on that platform, a lot of it was, tutorial, right? And most of these people became known for providing that content, and then it graduated into, comedy, fitness, fashion, all these other things that are, I would say, like standard verticals today. And gaming just so happened to be one of the largest ones that was mostly, I would say, affected by the interactions between the user and the actual creator, which I think was perfect for live streaming, especially in the earlier days of esports and gaming, which now has become, I would say, the IRL meta, right? Where people are going out onto the street, filming and shooting whatever they want to live stream. And then even for a lot of these crypto creators too, like, it's kind of the same template. They want to be like these live streamers. I know some are a bit more religious and sticking to like the charting stuff. Again, there's a certain threshold I think you get to where that becomes mundane and not many people want to tune into that kind of content. I think AI's involvement into replacing the standard content creator archetype I think it's just going to go through another iteration, right? We're kind of seeing people use it for ideas. I think even the other day I watched a Twitch streamer, instead of Googling something for an answer, they asked ChatGPT. So it's been interesting, I think, to see that evolution over time. And I think we're seeing more attention being spent with AI resourcing and AI tooling.
So Noah, let me ask you here, because we found a really interesting article on this, which is how AI is changing search discovery. I think it was originally an article you shared with me from Andreessen Horowitz, if I'm correct. And it was titled How Generative Engine Optimization, or GEO, Rewrites the Rules of Search. So what were your initial thoughts?
I would like to think less surprised, but more of just seeing this play out naturally. Just a lot of it is from having a greater pulse on what's trending, but also how people are consuming. That's probably the biggest takeaway from understanding trends and where larger industries are developing. And I think A16Z is usually a good source, whether it is exploring new verticals or new industries and kind of understanding where their investments are headed or why they chose a specific thesis. And I think coming across this article and understanding that AI has taken a greater share of people's lives, even outside the crypto and creator space, it makes sense, just given the fact that a lot of how people are searching for information is less so on places like Google and just finding a very succinct answer through a prompt. So I guess new concept that they're kind of coining as generative engine optimization over SEO. I'm with it, right? I like this idea that instead of visibility being highly, ranked based off of a results page, it's how well you can index yourself from these LLMs that you're kind of asking for information on. And I like to think there are companies right now that are also exploring how they're appearing in certain, I would say, I wouldn't necessarily call them specific marketing channels, but a lot of it is definitely correlated to the fact that because AI is being used a lot more to get answers or to get visibility, looking at this as an official way to be referenced and having a higher reference count is certainly becoming more and more relevant. And I think the way that this article kind of unpacks the length of like ChatGPT prompts down to the number of unique domains receiving that referral traffic from ChatGPT is a very clear indication that this is becoming a more relevant way of being discovered, and also even for brands to kind of use that as an opportunity to use this as a specific channel for discovery themselves. So SEO has, I mean, it's not to say that it's disappearing or that it's going anywhere anytime soon. I think there's still a number of years that it's going to take for something like Geo to completely unseat SEO just based off of how the internet works. But I'd like to think if you're not paying attention to this specific method, you're going to get lost in the shuffle.
I actually have the perfect example of why generative engine optimization is going to kill SEO. And it's basically this. I'll paint the picture very clearly. I used to, instead of just Googling what my issue was, I actually used to go to YouTube because I need like a tutorial. I'm a visual learner, I suppose. So I used to search, right, what my problem was. And, oftentimes, 90% of the time, there's a YouTube video about it, right? But, the caveat was most YouTube videos were like a version of the fix that you needed. So it wasn't fully unique or contextual in your own, experience or the bug that you had or the issue that you had. So what I started doing when ChatGPT came out was instead of going to YouTube or Google, I just started to ask ChatGPT. And the first thing I noticed is how kind of like contextual my errors got, down to the point where I could literally take a screenshot of my error, my crash, upload it onto ChatGPT, and then it will literally search the entirety of the internet and it will tell me like step by step, like how to fix it, whether it's like reinstalling your drivers, going into BIOS settings and, changing stuff that I would have no expertise about. And what would take me back in the day when I had some serious issues, sometimes I spent over like 6 to 8 hours on YouTube videos, just watching YouTube videos on how to fix my errors with no success, to like just basically finding out what my particularly issue was. Because when you have PC issues, it could be like a number of a million different things, right? So it could literally nail it down to the error number. So it just, for me, that's the best thing in the world, right? It's just, it's going from like 1. Before with SEO, it was 0 to 1. Now it's going from 0 to 100, right? So it's just perfect. It's just perfect.
We will see this play out. I'm not saying that, they can read crystal balls very well, but I think given how activity and use is very specific in terms of how a lot of people are using AI, I'd like to think there's higher than likely chance that this becomes the thing, just based off of a lot of the different companies that are building, but also the behavior habits of, I think, a lot of people that are trying to use AI. But I guess one thing to kind of question, and maybe this leads into the next topic, is like, how do you actually trust a lot of what, the LLMs are kind of, or rather the GPT wrappers are spitting out, right? Because there's almost this period where I feel if I'm asking a certain question or response, I mean, it even says as a mini disclaimer for a lot of these wrappers, it's like, the GPT isn't always accurate, right? Or maybe double check your answers. So I think to that end, SEO feels a bit more black and white because specifically programming it in a way to spit out specific results. But ChatGPT and others like it being learning models, right? At what point does it not get 100% hit rate, right? And maybe there is some injection of a person's bias of information that they're looking for. So I really wonder what that looks like.
Yeah, one thing I noticed is now it has started to reference. So like when it gives you an answer, it does reference sources. So you can click into websites where you can like go and see like, is this where the answer, the source is from? So that helps a little bit. But the one thing I do wonder, which I do not know about yet, is how does it rank, when you input a prompt and you want a certain information?
Yeah, I believe it's the number of references that is consistently being picked up. Because I think even the way that the article unpacks it is the way that certain information is selected is being packaged in a very scripted way. Takes the information that you're looking for. It ignores ones that I think are like overly lengthy, that has like multiple lines to describe something, and it goes for like I think it might have been like the shortest explanation, the very brief explanation of it, with it pointing to a direct source. I mean, I'm definitely not an LLM expert, but I'd like to think that's probably one of the ways that they're trying to collate everything.
Yeah, okay. Because I definitely feel like it will be very lucrative to find a way, essentially just the source for, a lot of these models, right? It's like whenever anyone even asks anything on this topic, we want to be the one who they, they recommend, because that will yield a lot of traffic.
I think the other thing that we have to remember is like a lot of these wrappers are, I want to say, DAO and MAO based, right? Especially, I think, in the focus of trying to compete with the millions of other competitors that each platform has. I know each company also has their strengths and weaknesses. So this probably translates into kind of like the next larger topic of, is AI making us mentally softer and dumber? Because the article that I think we had discussed, just based off of us finding it, it's not necessarily trained on just, I guess, more to spit out actual knowledge, but to kind of like be in your own, I guess, soundboard, right? I think it kind of tells you what it wants you to hear versus actually providing like very prescriptive things. And if you try to maybe insert some language to get it to a certain answer, it tries to please you versus like actually showing you, I guess, for lack of a better word, quote unquote, truth, right? But of course, I think the motivations for a lot of these companies is to show investors or to, show public, oh, like we're the most used ChatGPT wrapper, right?
Yeah, so my thoughts on that is pretty unique, which is anyone that's, that uses, let's say, ChatGPT on their day-to-day life, maybe like a little bit day-to-day here and there, you'd quickly notice that, yes, like it definitely seems to act as some sort of yes man, right? It wants to like generally be pretty agreeable, right? That's the first thing. And then second thing is you'll notice pretty soon that if you get to some sort of topics or where, there's not a clear answer for something, it can definitely have, I believe they call it hallucinations, which is basically is just making stuff up. So that's why you cannot use it as a lawyer, because, it can just like basically make up a law that doesn't exist and then you're in trouble, right? So that's why you should actually get legal counsel. But basically the point is you have to be a bit more advanced in terms of prompting to be able to get it to a point where it's not just being agreeable with you and not kind of like having any references or sources that you can like back or verify. So yeah, I think that is in its current iteration, I would say for the most part, it also tries to, like the article explains, like keep you there, right? So of course, if ChatGPT were straight to the point and they give you the exact answer with a reference right away, you would probably just like use it a lot less, right? As opposed to like giving you like a piece of what you want and then be like, would you like me to do this next, right? And it's like, well, you could have done everything in one go and then I wouldn't have to keep prompting with you, but then that would kind of like kill a lot of their insane retention numbers that they probably have, right? To be able to like be worth like $30 billion or something like that, right? So yeah, I think it's one of those things where it's like, yes, it's an amazing tool, but at the same time, it's like, are we also becoming like the product in a lot of ways, right? Because there's no ChatGPT without humans, kind of like interacting there and like paying the subscriptions and just increasing our screen times yet again to another app or tool, right?